Hi, everybody, and welcome to the new year. I know that so many of us have been waiting for this moment. Honestly, the new year. 2020 was undoubtedly one of the most challenging and complex, strange, for many of us, painful years of our lives. Certainly for me, it was the most difficult year for a wide variety of reasons, both personal and communal and national and global, that I've ever experienced in my 40 plus years of life. And so here we are in the new year. And again, we have been waiting. 2020 for so many of us felt like a climb up a steep mountain. And it felt like a mountain that had no other side, like it was just a constant uphill climb. And we've been waiting for that year to pass so that we might find better days ahead. And here we are in 2021. And with the new year, not just this year, but every year, comes a strange sort of hope. On the one hand, and I don't mean to be a downer, but this is just reality. On the one hand, when the calendar year turned, when it went from December 31st to January 1st, just a couple of days ago, the reality is it was just another Thursday to another Friday. But every time the calendar year changes, there's something psychologically within us that senses new possibilities and, importantly for us today, new hope. That because 2020 is in the rearview mirror and because we are now here in 2021, there is something within us that feels alive, that maybe things are going to be better this year than they were last year. And last year, meaning last weekend, Steve began us on this journey that we are taking through the idea of hope. And he said three critical things I just want to remind us of that will launch us into our time together today. He said that in order for us as followers of Jesus, or for those of us who are watching who maybe aren't followers of Jesus, those of us who are just here because we're looking for some hope, for all of us, that it is critical, three key ideas in order to embrace and live with hope. That one, we have to know that we don't know. There are no guarantees. We cannot tell the future. We don't know for sure that tomorrow will be better than today. But secondly, that especially for followers of Jesus, we have to believe that God does indeed have better days ahead. Although we don't know what tomorrow holds, we believe deep within us in our hearts and minds that ultimately God has better days ahead. And although the journey to those better days may be filled with ups and downs, that God is writing a more beautiful story as we continue to follow him and trust in him. And finally, this is a key point as we launch into our time together today. Steve reminded us that hope, and in particular Christian hope, calls us to go until we get a no. The reason I think that is such a critical point is because culturally speaking, we often think of hope as just a grown-up version of wishful thinking. We say things like, I hope 2021 will be better than 2022. And pop culture renderings of hope tell us that what that phrase means is that I wish, I'm really like something deep inside me wishes that this year will be better than next year. Hope in culture at large is, again, simply a grown-up version of wishful thinking. But I want to spend a little bit of time today talking about the nature of Christian hope. I want to say this again. I said it just a moment ago, but I want to say this again. Most of us watching would probably consider ourselves Christians or followers of Jesus. But there are some of us watching, maybe you were invited by a friend or a family member, maybe you found us online and you heard that we were talking about hope and you desperately need some hope, so you're tuning in. Whoever you are, but in particular, if you don't consider yourself a Christian or a follower of Jesus, this is critically important for you because the Christian understanding of hope Hope within Christian thought, what the Bible tells us about hope, is something dramatically different than all of the cultural renderings of hope as grown-up wishful thinking. Let me show you. In a book that we call 1 Peter, in the opening lines, chapter 1, in verse 13, the writer, Peter, he says this, "Therefore, with minds that are alert," pay attention to that word, "with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming." Again, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. This letter was written many millennia ago, a couple of millennia ago, in ancient Greek. In the ancient Greco-Roman world, it was common practice for men, and the natural attire was for men to wear these long flowing robes. And so when these men would go off to battle or to run in a race or to go out into the fields to farm, they would have to take these robes, tuck them into their waist. Some of the old English renderings of this word say to gird up. And so this word that we read in 1 Peter chapter 1, to have minds that are alert as we set our hope on Jesus who is coming, that word means to gird up, to take these long flowing robes, to tuck them into your waist, essentially to get ready for action. Now again, as Steve reminded us last week, to live with hope, with Christian hope, is not to passively sit back and wish for things to get better. To live with Christian hope is to gird up, to prepare yourself for action. There is an active, participatory invitation when it comes to living with hope, the way the Bible describes hope, the hope that we have in Jesus. The writer of this letter, 1 Peter, is a man named Peter, who was one of Jesus's closest friends and one of his original followers. And I often wonder if Peter, when he wrote this letter, had in mind a story from his own life. You see, years earlier, shortly after Jesus' resurrection, Jesus comes and he encounters his friends, his disciples, by the Sea of Galilee. And his disciples, not knowing that Jesus is alive again, have lost all hope. And so they go back to what they knew to do. They were fishermen by trade. And so they're fishing out on the Sea of Galilee. And the resurrected Christ shows up by the shore and he calls out to them. And eventually, as the disciples recognize that it is Jesus, that Peter says, "It is the Lord." And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him. It's the same word, the same action. When Peter sees Jesus, the source of his hope, out on shore, he wraps up, girds up his outer garment. And he jumps into the water and swims to land. This is a beautiful picture of what Christian hope looks like and what Christian hope calls us to. Again, Christian hope is not a passive, sitting back, grown-up version of wishful thinking. Christian hope is an invitation to take action, to fix your eyes on the source of hope, which for followers of Jesus is Jesus himself. To jump into the water, so to speak, and to make effort and to rush toward the shores where hope waits for us. The writer, Tim Keller, in a fantastic book called Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering, he describes this dichotomy between culture's understanding of hope and Christian hope. And he says it this way: while other worldviews lead us to sit in the midst of life's joys, foreseeing the coming sorrows, Christianity empowers its people to sit in the midst of this world's sorrows, tasting the coming joy. There is a sort of reverse effect when it comes to living with Christian hope. Christian hope empowers us and it enables us by God's Spirit to not deny or ignore this life's pain and sorrows and hurt, but to sit in the midst of this life's sorrows and pains and hurt and to know that better days are coming. And with that sort of confidence, with that sort of faith, and with that sort of trust, to live in the midst of the sorrow, in the midst of the pain, in the midst of the hurt, knowing, once again, that better days are coming, which then enables us to go until we get a no. It is a sort of proactive, aggressive even, following with hope in our body and bones. The writer Eugene Peterson, in his paraphrase of the Bible called The Message, he actually translates 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 13 this way. He says, roll up your sleeves in order to receive and to live with, essentially, the hope that we have in Jesus. Roll up your sleeves. Get ready to get your hands in the dirt, in the muck, in the mire. Christian hope is, again, I can't reiterate this point enough. It is not passively sitting back. For so many of us, we have staked our hope on the calendar year changing. When I go on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, I see so many posts these days that are celebrating the fact that it's now 2021. It's no longer 2020. And so because the calendar year has changed and 2020 is in the rearview mirror, I know that now things are going to get better. And while that is somewhat hopeful on the surface, when you really dig down deep, that sort of thinking is just wishful thinking. This belief that just because we're in a new year, things will automatically get better is not true. But here's what we know as followers of Jesus. Even if today is as painful or more painful than it was yesterday, even if 2021 begins to pose challenges for us that feel even greater and more significant than the challenges we faced in 2020, what we know is that better days are still ahead. And what we are called to do is to roll up our sleeves and to continue to trek forward with hope in our bones, knowing that Jesus, the source of our hope, stands on shore, calling us toward him. This is the nature of Christian hope. Now, I was talking to my mom the other day. And I'm Korean American, and my mother, is Korean, first generation Korean, and she grew up in Korea. And there is this tradition in Korea that we still hold in our family here called sebe. And sebe is every new year, children go to their parents and they bow as a sign of respect. And then the parents say a word of encouragement to the children. But my mother, who is one of the most faithful followers of Jesus I have ever known, rather than saying a word of encouragement to us every year, what she does is she prays for us. Every new year, we go and do sebe, we bow before her, and you say this Korean line, essentially, many blessings to you, mom and dad, in this new year. And my mother, her response every year is not to say some words of encouragement, but rather to place her hands on our heads, my head and Jenny, my wife. She places her hands on our heads and she prays for us. But here's what I know about my mom. Although there is the formality every new year of bowing before her and her physically placing her hands on us and praying for us, what I know about her is that she prays for us just as intensely and just as passionately and faithfully every single day. Doesn't matter if it's 2020 or 2021, December 31st or January 1st. My mother has a daily practice, a ritual of sorts, of seeking God, of staking her hope on God and God alone. That no matter what day, no matter what month, no matter what year it is, She just continues to go until she gets a no. She stakes her hope on the source of her hope, Jesus and Jesus alone. And this has been true of my mother ever since I've known her, which has been obviously my entire life. My mother grew up in South Korea. She was the youngest of 4 children, but by the time she was a teenager, she had lost both of her parents to sickness. By the time she was in her mid-20s, she had lost 2 of her older brothers. By the time she found herself in her early 30s, she was in a broken marriage with a young child on the way, me. By the time she was in her mid-30s, she found herself an immigrant in America as a single parent, raising a son in a land she did not know, in a language she did not speak, working 2, 3, 4 jobs at a time just to keep a roof over our heads. My mother's story is a story of pain and loss and struggle. And yet, my mother is still to this day the most hopeful person I know. But her hope is not wishful thinking. It's not an idyllic fantasy about life being perfect. Her hope is an often grueling grip on the reality that Jesus is with her and for her, not after the pain and suffering, but in the very midst of the pain and suffering. My mother is the sort of Christian who rolls up her sleeves every day and goes about the work of Christian hope. A couple of years ago, she turned 70, and on her bucket list was a trip to Hawaii. She had never been, and she had always wanted to go. And so I decided, man, 70th birthday, that's a big deal. Let's do this. Let's check this off the bucket list. And so I bought a couple of plane tickets and reserved a hotel, and my wife was incredibly gracious. We had just had our second child at the time, but she said, go, take your mom and have this incredible time with her. And so a couple of years ago, I took my mom to Hawaii, and we stayed right near Waikiki Beach because, my mom's 70 and she wants to do the tourist thing. And so we stayed on Waikiki, and right outside of our hotel window, literally right outside of the balcony, we could see a mountain called Diamond Head. And Diamond Head is one of the most popular and also one of the most strenuous hikes on the island. And so I looked at that mountain and I looked at my 70-year-old mother and I said, Mom, do you want to hike Diamond Head tomorrow? Hoping that she would say no. And she looked at me and she said, yes, let's do it. And so the next morning, we pack up our waters and our snacks and our backpacks and we drive to the trailhead, and I'm looking up at this insanely steep hike. 600 feet in elevation, almost completely straight up, a mile straight up into the sky. And I look at my 70-year-old mother and I say, Mom, are you sure you want to do this? We could actually just turn around and get some poke bowls and sit on the beach right now. And she smiled at me and she said, let's go. And so we start hiking. Literally, it feels like hiking up to the heavens, just straight up Diamond Head. And about halfway up, we're drenched in sweat. And I look back at my mother who was just behind me. And I say to her, Mom, this is already a pretty good view. We can just turn back and head back to the hotel and get a rest. We don't have to go all the way to the top. And my mother, 70 years old, 5'0", she rolls up her sleeves. She smiles at me and she walks right past and continues to climb. And eventually, we found ourselves at the peak of Diamond Head, sharing this incredible view of the island. We eventually made our way back down, and we headed back to our hotel, drenched in sweat, exhausted, and tired. And my mother, the first thing she wanted to do was FaceTime her grandchildren, my kids. And remember, we had just had our second at this point. His name is Simon, and he was just a couple of months old at that time. My mother is FaceTiming our kids, and she eventually begins to talk to her newborn grandson, Simon. And with tears welling up in her eyes, my mother was telling her newborn grandson of this story that took place just moments ago, where she did what in her mind in many ways was unthinkable as a 70-year-old woman, where she conquered this mountain. And with tears in her eyes, I watched as she told her grandson, Simon, I did this for you. I did it thinking about you. And what she meant was this. When my son had been born, just a couple of months earlier, my mother had given him his Korean name, because my son's Korean name is Somang, which means hope. Of course, because this is what hope looks like: to roll up your sleeve, to keep going until you get a no matter how steep the mountain feels, to climb and to continue climbing, knowing that as difficult as the climb is, Jesus is for you, he is with you, and through him, all things are possible. It doesn't matter whether it's 2020 or 2021 or any other year. It does not matter the circumstances or situations. It doesn't matter the pain or the hurt or the guilt or the shame or uncertainty or anxiety. When Jesus is for you and with you, all you need do is roll up your sleeves and keep pressing forward. This is the hope we have. Let's pray together. Jesus, we thank you that despite our circumstances, in spite of the trials and challenges we have faced, are facing, and will face in the days and months and years to come, we thank you that you are with us and that you are for us and that you and you alone are the source of our hope. We ask that you would give us the courage, the trust, and the faith to roll up our sleeves, to trek forward, to continue to go until we get a no, knowing that you have better days ahead. We love you, and we thank you, and we trust you. We pray these things in your name. Amen.